Welcome aboard Rocket Ship, the platform with the most relevant content for competitive examinations. This is Rocket Ship IAS Lab, and continuing with our series on answer writing for general studies papers of civil service main examination, we would take up a question that you might come across in GS paper 3. Here goes the question. What do you understand by responsible consumption? How it can help serve the objectives of sustainable development and inclusive growth. As we can see, the question has two parts as usual. In the first part, you have to write about your understanding of responsible consumption, and in the second part, you have to you have to again explain how responsible consumption can help the twin objectives of first sustainable development and then inclusive growth. Uh, to be quite frank, to make a confession here, I too found this question quite difficult. And the strategy that I am adopting here, that rather than giving my understanding of responsible consumption, what we am doing here, that I am talking about the characteristic features of responsible consumption. Like I am listing out the characteristic features of responsible consumption, and that is how I am organizing my answer. You could proceed as per your comfort, but again we would be discussing concepts that would be important, that would be of quite vital to any question on responsible consumption. Anyway, how do we introduce our answer? We are actually starting with a quote by Gandhiji. We are actually paraphrasing Gandhiji. And this quote, it actually encapsulates the very idea of responsible consumption. The quote goes like, "The earth has enough for everyone's need, but not for even even one man's greed." By Gandhiji. Actually, this quote, it sets the tone of the entire concept of responsible consumption. That responsible consumption is essentially about meeting our need rather than engaging in greed. So again, we should meet our need rather than our greed. So this is responsible consumption is all about. Now, responsible consumption, it encapsulates consumption habits which consciously avoid negative impacts of overconsumption. We are not defining what responsible consumption is, but we are saying this that it's quite opposite of overconsumption. Again, these habits have place for values like environment consciousness, an inclusive system of production that cares as much about the producer, the worker, as well as how the raw material is sourced, compassion for animals and plant life, and a foresightedness that our actions do not harm the productive resources of the earth. So actually there are a number of concepts that would be core to responsible consumption. These concepts are things like that the system should be environment conscious, then it should be inclusive enough that even the interest of the worker who is engaged in the production system should be kept paramount. Actually it should be it should be respected, his interest, his or her interest, the interest of the worker too should be respected. Moreover, there is also this understanding that the production system, for example, it should source its raw material from ethical sources. To give you just an example, there is a debate over palm oil that actually many people are complaining, and again there is some material in this complaint, some material in this allegation, that palm oil products production is degrading, and in fact it is leading to deforestation. And this deforestation, this degradation of habitat, is actually endangering some species, for example the orangutan. So again we have to think about the our fellow beings too if we are actually practicing responsible consumption. And this idea that our action, our consumption habits at present, our consumption at present should not compromise the productive resources of the earth. This, as you can understand, as you can connect it with the core idea of inclusive growth too. That inclusive growth is essentially about meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generation to meet their needs. This is essentially what responsible consumption too has it in its mind. Now we are listing some of the characteristic features of responsible consumption. These features include frugality and non-ostentation. For example, minimalism. That a responsible consumer does not care about show off, that is, he does not care about ostentation, and he is ready to make do with much less. His material needs are not too much. Then he identifies with brands, choices, etc., which are considered environment friendly or consensus, etc. Essentially, we have been talking about environment friendly so many times. Now we will talk about things like consensusness. That is, the brand should be considered consensus. An obvious example would be the Tata Group. Tata Group, for various reasons, for an example, its contribution towards nation building or their treatment of their employees, their workers, is known for their consensus dealings. So a responsible consumption would prefer Tata Group's offerings, Tata Group's products over competing products. Then there is, this is a very important concept in responsible consumption, that there is environment consciousness. For an example, a concern for ecological footprint. Ecological footprint, as you would understand it, it is essentially about the impact of our actions on the environment. Then there is concern for values like empathy, inclusiveness, and compassion for wildlife, as we have given the example of the palm oil industry, the palm oil production, how it is considered like it's actually accused of harming the uh, endangered wildlife. And obviously, a responsible consumption would like to avoid palm oil consumption. Then, till now, we have talked about the attitudinal factors. Now we would actually see what are the actual practices that responsible consumption encapsulates. That they would be choosing eco-friendly products. They would practice the 3 R's of reduce, reuse, and recycle, which, as you can extend this idea, that the 3R is essentially, it's connected to circular economy. It's connected to the circular economy. Reduce, reuse, and recycle. Then they have concern for sustainability, as we were just talking about, that they have it in mind that our consumption at present does not compromise the productive resources of the earth system. Now, taking up these points in detail, responsible consumption usually exhibits frugality. There is a conscious or otherwise dislike for ostentatious living. Sometimes people consciously avoid show off. Sometimes this is quite ingrained in them. Responsible consumption essentially boils down to one's attitude. So attitudinal factors are very, very important. People identify strongly with brands or choices which are considered environment friendly, consensus, etc., as we have tried to understand through the example of Tata Group. Though you please avoid writing the names of private labels, private business on your BSc papers. There is an evident environment consciousness at the core of responsible consumption. Concepts like ecological footprint become deciding factors in people's consumption habit. People would think about the ecological footprint of their consumption habits. For example, they would prefer biodegradables. To just give you one examples over the non-biodegradables, they might avoid using plastic and go for the biodegradable products, to give you just one example. Then there is concern for values like empathy, inclusiveness, etc., which become prominent. For an example, people might choose a label known for treating its workers well. We have all given the example of Tata. Another example is Fab India. Fab India actually it sources its products from the like a small scale handicraft, actually handicraft manufacturer, someone like those. They also display compassion for animals and plant life, as the debate over palm oil shows. All this translates into practices like the 3 R's of reduce, reuse, and recycle. People sometimes go for eco friendly alternatives, even paying a premium. Again, this is the reality that people who are considered responsible consumption, they generally come from the higher income strata, and they do not mind paying premium price over comparatively priced but less sustainable, less environment friendly products. Then there is an underlying concern for sustainability. People are conscious that their actions do not compromise the Earth's productive systems, imposing costs on future generations. Again, as you can well understand, if we were to, for an example, burn quite some fossil fuel, it would essentially compromise the Earth system. For an example, it might lead to climate change, it might lead to sea level rise, and so many other things which would essentially harm the future generations at the cost of like our present enjoyment, present pleasure in consumption. Now, we have already defined what are the characteristic features of responsible consumption. Now, we would see how responsible consumption can help serve the twin objectives of sustainable development and economic growth. That is inclusive. That is inclusive growth. We have just used verbose language here. But anyway, responsible consumption means less pollution of air, water, and other commons. You might recall that we have talked about the concept of the like problem of the commons, and we have also mentioned of the name of the path breaking economist Ostrom, who had worked on the problem of the commons. What commons means? Commons means the common resources of the of mankind. For example, air or like the water bodies. These are common resources of the community. They are not owned by one person. And to give you just one example, if we were to like stop or like cut on using non biodegradable plastics, it would mean that our water sources won't be choked by plastic, which is the case as of today. And in that way, even people who are less fortunate than us, people who are poorer than us, they would be able to use that water resources for their water source, water body for their needs. This is essentially how it encompasses inclusiveness. And again, to give you another example, if suppose people were to take public transport over private transport, it would mean less pollution, less polluted cities. And you can well understand that unlike people like you who are quite richer, you can afford air purifiers, but the poor people might not afford, they might not be able to afford air purifiers. And having cleaner air would be inclusive in the sense that they can like benefit from the cleaner air, which is a common resource of the community. Then again, this would mean the less fortunate get equitable share in these resources. Moreover, choices like organic food, eco-friendly, cottage producer, etc. benefit the small holding farmer or handicraft producer. This is inclusive in the sense also that rather than big businesses, your choices, for example, handicraft or like um, organic food, organic produce, etc. would support the small scale producer. Then recycling, reduced footprint, etc. have eye on the future. This concern would translate into sustainable development. Again, if you were to reduce your resource use, it would mean that the productive system of the earth's productive system, they would be able to meet the needs of the future generation too. For example, less polluted air, or or for that matter, much less carbon dioxide in the air. That would mean that the climate change is controlled to some extent. In that way, the future generation would be like less harm due to climate change. Now, responsible consumption has been considered so important that it has been included in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Actually, responsible consumption and production are one of the goals of the UN Sustainable Development Goal. Actually, this is listed under the goal 12th, but you do not have to mention that. And it's just a nod to the vital importance of the concept. View. That ends our answer. It was really tough. But anyway, we would reassemble for the next lecture in a few days. As usual, we wish you all the best. Thank you.